God made us all different. But socialism seeks to make everybody the same by force of low and very tight control over everybody's lives. Control is the operative word. The true Marxist seeks to control everything and everybody. Thus, Marx's design leads to a totalitarian world. That is axiomatic. Take that as a word to the wise. Especially since socialism and its endgame of communism seek to also displace Christianity and free nation states, believing it will establish their happy world without God. Who do you suppose convinced the socialists of that? Who benefits from a world without God? For those who have been drinking the leftist Kool-Aid and support socialism, be careful what you wish for. People in communist countries have been known to risk their lives to escape their socialist captors to get into that part of the world where they have the freedoms we've always enjoyed in America, and too often take for granted. So, don't you wonder why they risk it all to escape Marx's utopia? If his utopia was all that great, and why do we not learn from the experiences of others? Why are so many people in America trying endlessly to push us into socialism? Without realizing he was setting people up to exchange one type of oppression for another, Marx believed the working people of his day, the proletariat, were oppressed by the bourgeoisie, those who owned land and businesses, who he thought abused everybody working for them. Some Facebook employees are making six-figure salaries, so it doesn't sound much like their CEO is abusing them. If so, that's the kind of abuse of which a lot of people would like to be victims. Thus, how bad can capitalism be? It seems Karl Marx always had trouble attracting or managing money, and his mother is quoted as saying,
"If only Karl had made capital instead of writing about it."
Marx's own family might have fit into his definition of oppressors, since he once expected an inheritance that didn't come, so there was money somewhere in the family tree. Read some details about him, and you will see patterns of his behavior that might have contributed to his financial problems. And now, a century and a half later, Americans are on the brink of losing their hard-won freedoms because of a man who couldn't manage to earn a living and as a result coined a system that has managed to kill 100 million people worldwide and put even more into poverty and misery. Sadly, the human cost is not part of the leftists' equation or their concern, so the die-hard socialists are still pushing it. If it gets them power, they believe, as did Niccolo Machiavelli, the end justifies the means. And doesn't Marx's goal to free the oppressed simply subject them to oppression by a different class of people? Oppression is oppression is oppression. At the risk of cliché, out of the frying pan into the fire. And yet there are apparently enough of them in the world that they have developed a website. In the middle of 19th century Europe, the circumstances Marx decried may have existed, but not now, and certainly never in America. Modern society has largely solved the problems that Marx whined about. So, the socialists of today found it necessary to create a proletariat in America where none existed, and they replaced class struggle with identity politics to do so. Because nobody in America was as unhappy as Karl Marx when the socialists arrived here, nor do the same economic and social class systems exist here today that existed in 19th century Europe. In other words, there is no nobility or royalty in America. So to create hate and envy sufficient to inspire armed violent revolution, the leftists have tried to convince targeted groups of people that they are oppressed. They have had to create unrest and identify an enemy, because everybody in America is already equal under the law, and the American people have always had equality of opportunity, at least ever since 1866. And the passing of the 14th Amendment. Prior to that time, many people in most states, including the North, owned indentured servants who were not known as slaves for many years, and once freed. A former indentured servant slave was free to own his own land and buy slaves himself. Democrats and Marxists want America to believe this country is a horrible place because of a history of slavery. It was likely the only thing they could think of. However, one of the first slave owners in the colonies was a former slave, Anthony Johnson, in 1620s Virginia, where he also owned over 250 acres of land. So if, as the Marxists would have people believe, America is a horrible place because white people owned slaves once upon a distant time, then they must include blacks as part of the oppressor class, since many former slaves also owned slaves, because that's the way the world had worked for thousands of years. However, that won't fit the leftist narrative and confuses things. So it's conveniently forgotten because making blacks hate blacks because of racism is a difficult plan to promote. And since Anthony Johnson, born in Angola and brought to Virginia as an indentured servant slave, this just goes to show that America is not the horrible place America haters want it to be, but a place in which opportunity always existed, no matter if the individual came to America as a slave and wound up a slave owner, or if the African came to America as an immigrant and became president of the United States even though he has no verifiable birth certificate. This nation was always considered the land of opportunity. That's also why so many Latin American families pay money they can't afford to send their minor children on a very long and dangerous journey, subjecting them to physical and sexual abuse en route, and sexual slavery upon arrival. They are typically accompanied only by other desperate people and criminals who promise to get them across the goal line into America. There seems to be no evidence that very many people of the world are swimming, snorkeling, surfing, floating, bribing, tunneling, or sneaking by cover of darkness or any other means into Cuba on leaky boats, blow-up mattresses and inner tubes, or trying to tiptoe or hang glide past armed forces and border guards to get into China or North Korea to get a better life. Is there a message there? If so, it isn't part of the lesson plan for Marxist professors in our colleges today. The egalitarian socialist is obsessed not by equality of opportunity, but by equality of outcomes, and per design of Karl Marx, they demand we should all be equal even if or especially if it means taking away the property and wealth of those who earned it to give it to those who did not earn it. Why many of today's college students think that's a fairer system is a mystery, because another description for that is grand theft. But here's a thought. When a tyrannical government redistributes your wealth and takes away your business and or property in the name of their, not your, idea of utopia and exacts another kind of oppression, only the identity of the oppressed class changes by trying to make everybody the same. How is that a better and fairer system? And if anybody can testify that Russian people who had to stand in lines for days just to be able to buy sugar or soap is in any way a utopia, please raise your hand.